Monroe Planning Commission meeting for Monday, October 23rd. It's 7 p.m. Call the meeting to order. And Hannah, if you would take roll, please.
I would love to. Commissioners present in establishing a quorum. Commissioners Blair, Bull, Lewis, Lockhart, Nugent, and Walker.
Excellent.
Commissioner Dawkins has been excused.
Thanks, Hannah. At this time, we have time set aside for public comments. Individuals in person or online that would like to make public comments, we allow 3 minutes per individual. And if you would like to make public comments, please. Do we have a sign-in sheet anymore? Is that still? But if we don't have a sign-in sheet, gentlemen, would either of you care to?
Actually, I would like to make just a short comment this time, try to keep it obviously within 3 minutes.
Okay, would you mind taking a seat up here where the camera and the microphone can get you?
My name is Lance Smith. Of course, I'm sure that everybody knows that by now, but I did cover last time I was here kind of the crux of what I was concerned about. But one of the things that I didn't get time to really talk about that I thought, most likely everybody probably knows this anyway, but the thing that really caught me off guard, because we'd had some discussions about how this was, the change in zoning, the way it currently exists, is going to affect us in the future down there if we want to continue to operate our company the way we've been doing for the last 44 years. And up until about a week before that meeting, I hadn't got a copy of the city's ordinance of how that would affect us. And Leanne told me that the section that really applies, it was a bit confusing because in one section, which was 22.40.030, it said general provisions, a change of tenant ownership or management shall not affect the non-conforming status. And then you read the section that she says does apply to us, which is 22.4.070. It seems it completely contradicts what the previous section says. It says that if no structural alterations are made, any legal non-conforming use of the structure or structures premises may be changed to another non-conforming use, provided that the hearing body, which I haven't got a real handle on what the hearing body is, but I'm assuming it's 2 or 3 or 4, whatever number of people would meet and discuss the future tenant that I would like to bring into the, and so anyway, the specific case shall find that the proposed use is more appropriate to the zoning district than the person that moved out. And I find that completely impossible. The idea that I would be able to bring a new tenant in and the new tenant would somehow conform more closely to high density residential and still be able to move into the existing premise. It doesn't seem to me that it would be possible to do.
In your particular case, sure.
Yeah, and I don't, yeah, exactly. I think this is more designed towards a house that was converted maybe to an office.
Sure.
Something of that nature. But because of what we do down there, I don't see how any future tenant would possibly conform more closely to a high density residential zoning than what I've got now. So that, I just want to bring that up. If nobody has read that in that, at least the kind of detail I'm looking at it from a renter's, landlord position. And in one point it says that I can have a new tenant and I can have a new tenant or manager or owner or whatever. And another section it says that I don't see how I could possibly bring a new tenant in under those conditions. Okay. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other public comments from?
No.
No, thank you. And is there anyone?
We do have someone in the Zoom lobby. If you'd like to comment, feel free to raise your hand and I'll give you the ability to speak. Nope.
Thank you very much. Item number 4, we'll move on to approval of minutes from our most previous meeting, October 9th.
I move to approve the minutes from October 9th, 2023.
Second, Melanie. Thanks, Jake. Commissioners in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved 7-0, or 6-0, I'm sorry. Next item up, this one is item number 5.1, 2024 to 2044 comprehensive plan, draft land use scenarios. And so, is this Mig or you, Lance?
It is, I mean, I can give a little bit of a, as planning commission is aware, we've been working on the draft land use scenarios, which is really a model that's looking at changes that we would make to our future land use map and zoning, and ultimately the jobs and housing and population allocations that we've gotten from the county. And we are, I don't know what version we're on, maybe 3, maybe more. But that this is I think we're getting down to the final version. And so I know that Alex from MIG is here this evening, and I'll turn it over to him because he can lead off the discussion and present that. We've just revised the draft, so these are it's fairly fresh.
Okay, good to have you, Alex.
Or seeing his screen.
He was on.
Alex, you're muted.
All right, that's a little better. Can everybody see the screen that says draft land use scenarios? All right.
Yes.
Great. So as Lance mentioned, first of all, thank you for having us in again tonight. As Lance mentioned, we've been doing since our initial public engagement back in April and through the continuous engagement that the city did through the summer. We've been developing a series of draft land use scenarios that are essentially designed to meet the growth targets that Snohomish County and the city have agreed to move forward with for the comprehensive plan update. So I'll step through the scenarios, just kind of talking about essentially what are some of the what ifs, if you will, on how growth can occur, where it can occur, but ultimately making sure that we can meet future targets, both for population and employment through 2044. As a preface to this, there are a number of elements that will move forward, in the coming months. One is that we'll continue to do more public engagement around these scenarios. There's a series of engagement strategies that we'll be implementing in early 2024 to discuss this with the community. But also, this pairs with the State Environmental Policy Act, SEPA, which is also required as a part of the comprehensive plan. So the scenarios tonight essentially meet our targets. And as I say, I'll step through those. How we step through those within SEPA might be just a little bit different, because ultimately that environmental process needs to cover any kind of future elements that we look at for the future land use map. So ultimately what we talk about in a series of alternatives will begin to formulate what the future land use map is that we'll be talking about in summer of 2024. So think of these as ways to think about different types of growth and where that growth occurs, but also potentially different ways that you could do that. So the goal for tonight is just to provide an update to you about these and gather your input. We'll also be doing a similar exercise with the city council December 4th, I believe, to hopefully gather agreement that these are acceptable scenarios to move into the next phase of community engagement. So it's both an update as well as to make sure we have your input as we move forward. So with that, let me move forward. So just as a reminder for what these scenarios include, we are essentially looking at two different scenarios that both generally meet both your housing and your employment target. And so when you look at what the need is for housing and the need is for employment, we need to be able to accommodate within the urban growth area just over 2,100 units. How you do that is up to you, but we do need to figure out a way to accommodate that number of units. From an employment standpoint, we need to accommodate just about 2,400 jobs. So that could be, it's not specific in the type of job, but having that increased employment available within the UGA through your future land use map is that step that we need to meet as a part of this comprehensive plan. So just kind of giving you a sense of, and we'll talk about this from a land use standpoint in just a moment, how do we meet that? And we've looked at it in two different ways. One is scenario one, which really focuses on downtown and some of your urban corridors, really focusing that growth within those areas. And I'll show some maps in a moment. The other way we've looked at that is still, still looking at your centers, your downtown, but also looking at neighborhood nodes, looking at, specific maybe neighborhood locations within existing neighborhoods, looking at some areas that are kind of on the periphery where there's more available land for growth. But, just a couple different ways to think about that. And, as an outcome, both of these generally meet your targets. It's just, again, different ways to do that. I'll also say that the scenarios that we're showing tonight have been updated since the Community Advisory Committee meeting that we had about a month ago. We got some great input from that group. We have updated the scenarios from kind of a locational standpoint for where some of these land uses might be. But overall, we're still kind of in that same ballpark in terms of land use and housing and employment.
Alex,
all right.
Can I ask a question here? So it looks like, we fairly easily meet our housing needs, but can you equate 2,100 units to a population? Are we using 2.3 people per housing unit, or how? Is there a conversion?
So from a housing standpoint, those numbers are from Snohomish County. And so they've already calculated that based on an assumed size of household. So from the county, we receive both employment and housing numbers, not necessarily population. That is translated into population, but that's already kind of baked into what we receive from the county.
Okay.
And so you are right, though. Your existing kind of available land supply can accommodate the forecasted growth for housing. It cannot accommodate, under the current land use system or land use allocation, cannot accommodate the employment. So that's really the meat of our discussion for the scenarios, is how we consider future employment within the city. All right, so just as a preface, we did base the scenarios on your existing future land use as a base to see, one, where growth is expected to occur, the types of growth that is expected to occur. So this is your existing future land use map. This is what's within your current comprehensive plan. And you can see, probably not, this shouldn't be surprising to any of you. You have a central core, you have a commercial area, you have some industrial, and then you have various levels of residential development depending on where you're at within the city. Primarily north of US 2, you're seeing more lower density residential development, as opposed to kind of south of US 2 is where you start to see some lower density residential, but also some of your higher density residential, like multifamily and mixed use. So I'm not going to step too far into that, but that's just to show you from a context standpoint what future land use looks like. So when you overlay that, part of the analysis that Snohomish County does, and actually all counties within the state do this, then it kind of trickles down into the cities, is looking at your available land supply. And so it looks at vacant land, partially used land, or redevelopable. And when you look at the definitions, vacant is obviously there's not an improved value on it. It's just blank land. Vacant, or excuse me, partially used and redevelopable parcels look at either the size of the parcel, and if there's a small house on a really large lot, or if there's different ways that the model can actually look at that and say, you might be able to fit something different onto those sites. So that's the color coding here. And and most of the land within Monroe is either partially used or considered redevelopable. There's very little vacant land within the urban growth area today. So a lot of what we talk about tonight is really focusing on those partially used and those redevelopable parcels. An added feature is also considering your critical areas. So that's wetlands, steep slopes, floodplains, other areas. So when you look at what, from a capacity standpoint, that Snohomish County says you have, when you overlay that with critical areas, those locations actually become much more diminished. So, just because it says it's redevelopable, if it's, full of wetlands, it's on a 40-degree slope, it's, in a riparian area, those critical areas are essentially unbuildable in many ways. And so we've added that layer to this when we start to think about what your capacity is, because that's really starting to give you the real number of where redevelopment is occurring. Commissioner Nugent, you had a question?
Sorry, quick question, because it looks like at least one spot that is marked as redevelopable. Does that take into account if there's an existing business there?
So redevelopable is typically a land to improvement value ratio. So it doesn't mean that it will redevelop per se. I mean, there are a number of parcels that have low improvement values, which are essentially the structure on the site and a large parcel. So, typically how they look at that is a 1-to-1 ratio, where if the structure and the value of the land are the same, it's not considered anything. If the land is more valuable than the structure, then that gets triggered as potentially redevelopable. So I want to stress, though, that redevelopable, identified as redevelopable, doesn't mean that it necessarily will redevelop. It just looks like there's potentially an imbalance there in terms of the improvement to the land value. So that's all that really means.
I have a question.
Clarifying that.
Sure.
For the land that is determined redevelopable in the map, are people like currently residing there, are they notified in any way that their land is considered that, or their home residence rental property is considered that?
No, and it's not really again, this doesn't trigger redevelopment. This is just based on assessor data, what the value of the structure is versus the property itself. So it doesn't mean that it will redevelop per se. It's just, essentially, numbers that we in Snohomish County use to calculate that. So this is pretty standard across how they calculate that. But yeah, it's not an indication that it will redevelop necessarily. It's just a marker, if you will, for what that property might be.
I think my concern is just that obviously these maps are public. Anybody can view them at this point. And if I'm either a renter or a homeowner and I see that there's a map that has like my property is determined that, then I mean, there can be some feelings about that. So I was just kind of curious about that.
True, and these maps were public even before. These are essentially from Snohomish County. We've added the critical areas to, I think, provide a little more accuracy to it in terms of whether or not they can develop. But yes, Snohomish County did this initial analysis. We've updated it since then to apply any existing development that's occurred since that was done in, I believe, 2019. All right, so next, let's keep going. And thank you for the questions on that. These are great questions. So as we start to think about scenarios, one of the things we've looked at is, kind of where is your existing development occurring and at what scales or density. So the next few maps are called hex maps. So the reason why you'll see these broken up into little hexagons, they're just over an acre, about an acre and a quarter. And the reason why we use hexagons as opposed to parcels is that hexagons provide a uniform kind of geography for us to look at different densities, whether that's a population or employment, as opposed to parcels, which vary in size and don't necessarily give you an apples to apples comparison in terms of kind of where the density and the development is actually occurring. So I'm going to step through these just to give you a sense of kind of existing development and kind of where that's occurring and the different types of development, and then we'll step into the scenarios in just a moment. So with this, you're all familiar with the existing land uses within Monroe. You'll see, that there's, development kind of where you would expect it to be from a residential standpoint. So these are just in general residential style development. The darker the hexagon, the more dense it is, and you can see the scale up at the top. So there's greater population in areas with darker hexes. So, again, not surprisingly, this kind of southeast portion of Monroe has the greatest density. It's kind of mixed in the middle, and then further north, you start to see where there's either very little density, that could mean that there's no residences in those locations, or that it's larger parcels with fewer units or people living within those units. So just kind of give you a sense of where things are happening. Definitely south of US 2, you're seeing a little bit more density, probably tighter, smaller parcels, more units, whereas further north, it's a little bit lighter. And then when we start to look at, start to break it out by types of parcel. So again, not just population, but residential development type. On lots that are larger than 5,500 square feet, which is pretty typical in Monroe. So that's kind of your large lot development type. You're seeing most of that really occurring north of US 2. So that's those lighter pieces. That's where you're starting to see, fewer homes on larger lots, as opposed to the southern part of the city, where you start to get some of those darker areas. There are some concentrations, kind of in the northeast corner, where you do see some concentrations. That's newer subdivisions, which are typically smaller lots, and so that's why we see concentrations there. So again, residential, kind of where you'd expect it, at varying scales. However, when you start to get into smaller lots, this is where the differences really start to occur. Just a few locations north of US 2 where you start to see smaller lots. Again, kind of the number of units in those hexes, the darker means that there's more units. South of US 2, you kind of see a mix, but you do see deeper concentrations with some of these smaller units, or excuse me, smaller parcels with more units in those hexes. So again, it's kind of scattered in how this is. I think a lot of this probably has to do with kind of when and how Monroe residential area is developed. But it is also an indicator when we start to think about future land use, potentially what available land is there, kind of the scale of those parcels, and how we might think about, other elements within a future land use map that could support additional housing. When we get into more dense types of units, ones that have townhomes, row homes, or other types of units that share walls, essentially, more concentrated elements, not necessarily apartments, there's very few in Monroe. And so when you look at housing diversity and types, that's something we've heard from the community pretty regularly, is that it's really a single family city, or a detached housing type of city, as opposed to having some diverse housing types. And that's really where you start to see kind of really very few locations within the city where you're getting different types of housing units. And that's really true when you get into, say, like fourplex. I mean, it's really just concentrated in a few places within the city. So again, kind of thinking about those scenarios, how you would apply that. Also locationally, in 2024, we'll get into final future land use map, which we'll be talking more about this, but this helps provide a basis for how we think about growth and change over time, just based on existing development. This no on 5 or more units, not much different than 4 or more, really concentrated just in along the North Kelsey location and along 179th. When we get to employment, again, focused, you see it on the west side. That's the industrial area where you see kind of that smattering of hexes. You also see it downtown along Main Street. So, those are your core employment areas. You do see some within the commercial area along US 2. Some of these locations that have that really light blue hex, that are kind of smattered through the residential area, those could be home occupations. So it's just a job or 2 jobs. So they do pop up in the data, but really the density is downtown and along US 2 and in the industrial area. All right. Before I jump into that, any questions about kind of the lay of the land within Monroe, just in terms of development type, land use densities, kind of where density or where land uses are occurring? All right, we can always come back to those as well too. So the next steps is really starting to talk about, okay, we know where the existing land uses are. We know what Snohomish County has told us in terms of vacant and redevelopable land. The goal for us is to identify how we accommodate that growth within the existing urban growth area. So as I said, the 2 scenarios that we've developed generally meet targets. There's one exception, which is employment. And I think that's really just kind of, what the county said versus what the city said. We're about 70 jobs off between the city limits and the urban growth area. It's not something we're really worried about under scenario 2. It's really just kind of a function of how we're considering that growth. So I think, for today, we can say that we're generally meeting those targets and that we can find 70 jobs, in one of those hexes within these scenarios. But so I wanted to just, step through kind of what those might start to look like. So if we get to that center focused growth, and again, this is an outcome, a lot of the community engagement that we talked about, which was creating walkable spaces, creating a core that has both, kind of local destinations, which is a key element of your vision statement, but also providing, really that core that people want to be able to identify within the city of Monroe. And part of it's downtown, but part of it is also, your existing larger format retail. So how do you accommodate, different types of uses or other elements there that make that more walkable? And then how do you connect that to the existing downtown? So this concept really focuses on that core, that core area. It looks at adding potentially mixed use within your larger commercial area where your Fred Meyer and Lowe's and other areas are. And there is actually vacant land within there that you could do that. It looks at increasing densities downtown and also adding some more mixed use availability within downtown. It's not altering downtown like changing Main Street, but it's providing those rooftops that support businesses within that area. It also looks at along West Main Street, and there was a lot of conversation with this at the CAC, is really focusing on encouraging mixed use within that Main Street core, because some of the parcels are larger. We're seeing some development there, but really kind of continuing that element. And a lot of that's actually within that one in particular is within your existing comprehensive plan. The other elements are looking at how do we increase employment? So, potentially different types of uses within industrial, where instead of, warehousing, for example, maybe looking at attracting higher intensity manufacturing that allows more jobs. But also, really starts to think about housing and employment, not individually. So while industrial might have higher densities, really looking at how those residential areas or those commercial areas could support mixed use. So that's essentially the the core concept, or the center focused growth concept, is focusing on that urban core. And so when we look at that and we start to compare what that means in terms of potential, kind of vacant and redevelopment and meeting that scenario, this is an overlay of looking at that core concept with those vacant lands that were identified within the buildable lands inventory. And so you'll start to see that just because we identify these areas as changing land use doesn't mean that we're assuming that every parcel within a mixed use area, for example, changes to mixed use. What we're assuming is that those vacant and redevelopable parcels over time will start to transition into that future land use type. We're also looking at, how do you increase the diversity of housing types? And that was an important public engagement element that came out from that process. So those yellow parcels that are identified in the lighter yellow, which are typically lower density residential, is potentially upping the density from R4 to R7, which is still essentially single family, just allows it at a little bit more scale, but also potentially considering duplex and other uses within those yellow areas. So it's starting to add that mix into it, and we'll talk a lot more about that in the coming months, but starting to essentially kind of add a different housing mix within your existing areas for properties that have identified as vacant or redevelopable. And so you can see those pop out. So with this, we generally meet the target for Snohomish County. This is the one, though, that we need to figure out a little bit more employment, about 70 or so jobs. And that's really because up near Roosevelt Road, up on the northwestern corner, we're assuming that's mostly residential, whereas I believe the county assumed that there would be some commercial within that. So again, this is just a scenario, but that's kind of what this one looks at. The next scenario is center growth and neighborhood nodes. So this one also focuses on the central core. Like the other one, it looks at adding mixed use within your existing larger format retail sites. And again, there is vacant land within there to do that. This one also looks at, rather than just mixed use along West Main, we also look at the triangle along 179th Avenue and also along 154th Street. So it starts to kind of break down that existing kind of solely detached residential use to allow potentially some different types of uses along those corridors. The other two key elements for this is focusing on the periphery, is that rather than residential within your existing outside of city limits within the urban growth area, is focusing on more mixed use and neighborhood serving commercial. And so those are those pink areas, up in the northwest and the southeast corner. So trying to create some community nodes to that, because again, the walkability is great if you're in the central core, but if you're in some of these existing neighborhoods, it's still very difficult to get to the core if you're living further out. So kind of bringing some of those uses to people that have said that would be of importance. I think an important outcome to notice here too, and this was an outcome of the Community Advisory Committee discussion, is not just focusing these changes along the southern portion, south of US 2, but also think about how we promote mixed use, smaller scale, localized commercial north of US 2. We looked at where is available land, what might actually transition over time, and we found this space along Chain Lake Road, which could be a great kind of central node, a small scale, small serving retail that can be mixed use, it can be locally serving commercial, but instead of having that as detached, maybe that's a different type of use within those areas. And those are the types of things that really help us start to meet that balance between employment and housing, but also kind of diversifies your availability for housing type.
Alex, can we pause? I think Jake has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, this is the perfect slide for it. Is the 4-story hotel, is that just like an idea? I assume it's not an actual thing in the plans?
Lance or Anita, you might be able to speak more to it. I believe that was something that had been discussed through the fairgrounds discussion. But Lance, did you have any more information on that?
I don't, but that's where it came from, was the potential for for doing, a project like that out
Right.
next to where the fairgrounds is.
I was just thinking it was oddly specific, so I'm like, that's news to me.
Yeah.
All right, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one that I think we kept the label there because it is a unique use, but it also has a high number of employees potentially with it. And so that's one that we wanted to focus. That's a little different than you'd say like a general commercial, like it's not a Home Depot or it's not something like that. It's kind of a specific type of use.
And then Alex, do you know, is that dark gray line that's, I guess, directly adjacent to the hotel that runs all the way along Highway 2, all of that is county land, I assume?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's mostly all the fairgrounds, I believe. So kind of getting back to this, so you'll see, just like the last scenario, we've now overlaid the buildable lands inventory with the scenario, and you can start to see some of those parcels pop up within those airbrushed areas. And I think again, specifically along like that Chain Lake Road area, we looked at that as a potential node because it seems central, but also that there's vacant land within those locations. So again, looking at these areas a little bit more dynamically in specific locations for where there's existing commercial, could you convert that to mixed use? Some of the outlying areas that are located or identified more as future residential as being a little bit more flexible with those to create neighborhood centered nodes, which also brings up your employment. And then again, with this one too, those yellow parcels in the northern portion primarily as, considering a little bit more of a diverse type of housing that could go in there. Doesn't mean that it's not going to be detached residential, but potentially options for other types of middle housing that are kind of part of the mix and that we have to be able to address as a part of state requirements. So again, with this one provides us more employment than the first scenario, but still generally meets those requirements and standards for the targets. And so, just some examples, what these start to look like, low density residential versus medium density residential. They're not huge differences. They're still, for the most part, single family homes. They're detached homes. They might be smaller yards compared to what you'd see elsewhere. But, I think the big changes are what we're looking at is really that commercial area, to thinking about it, not just as commercial, but as commercial and mixed use, creating more of a district as opposed to more of an auto focused area. Again, it doesn't mean we're stopping or, changing parking per se. It's more like, can we create spaces that people can walk and they can get their services a little bit more immediately as opposed to solely driving. So those are the scenarios. I'm happy to step back through. I see some hands raised. Happy to step back through and answer any questions on those.
Brandy?
I have a question. So I like a lot of these ideas. What it feels like though is like we have to choose scenario 1 or scenario 2. What about picking the best, like what people like the best that seems to fit what we were hearing from our feedback? And creating like a third scenario?
That is an excellent question. And so these are not an either or decision. So these are scenarios that we're using for analysis and for additional public engagement. Ultimately, with your future land use map, it will likely be a combination or new additions to these scenarios. And that's part of what we want to, one, make sure we have your input to move forward on this. But 2, they're really just places for people to have a conversation around potential trade-offs. And so we know that we have to meet these targets. We know that, PSRC and Commerce have to acknowledge our plan as we move forward. How we do that is up to us. It doesn't mean that it's one of these. It could be a combination. It could be something new. But we want to make sure we can show different ways that you might be able to meet that. And so that's really what these scenarios are. It's for engagement, but also analysis to make sure that we understand land use implications, transportation, environmental, all of those elements that go into the environmental document.
Jake?
Yeah. Alex, so unless Jay was, I don't think anyone on the current planning commission was here during the last comprehensive plan update. Actually, you were, right?
Tail end.
Okay, gotcha. And so where is like the traffic infrastructure aspect of the comprehensive plan? When does that come along? Just because as we're looking or considering some of these plans or these areas, and I know I won't go for the low hanging fruit with the not Roosevelt, but the Ingram Road area. But you take any of these, like the intersection of 179th and 154th, for example, as we look at these ideas and go, yeah, mixed use might be cool on 154th. At what point in our planning or in the next few years, do we say, well, we need to match traffic infrastructure with that?
That's actually the next step for here, and one reason why we need to move forward on these scenarios, because part of the environmental analysis is looking at the transportation impacts. And so they'll look at what's out there today, for traffic, a kind of an existing condition, and then they'll look at, an overlay of what if this growth occurs over time. So they'll essentially take these scenarios or, a combination of these scenarios and do analysis on it so that one, we can understand where the impacts are. But two, also align, if that becomes the future land use map, align what transportation projects or mitigation projects might be. So that's really the next step. But before we release transportation and utilities and all of those folks to do their analysis, we need to make sure we have agreement that this is the right path forward for that. And again, it doesn't set us on one or the other. It's really about, these are a series of trade-offs that we want traffic and utilities and others to be able to analyze as a part of the environmental document.
Awesome. And then I'm sorry, two other small ones. Number one, they is the county, right, that we'd be sending it to?
So
for consider the initial consideration that you mentioned?
It's kind of a combination. So you have to have acknowledgement from Puget Sound Regional Council, Department of Commerce, as well as county. So it's not just the county. There are a number of agencies that have to essentially agree with your analysis and your map. And so that's why it's important to, do things like this, because it shows that you're evaluating as holistically as possible. And that's part of the EIS process that we need to launch into in early 2024.
Got it. And then as it relates to what we send them, so let's say that we send the map as it is right here with kind of the ideas of where we want to put mixed use. They do their analysis on it. Are they kind of doing it so that each of these ideas or these areas could kind of stand on their own? Or does their consideration go, well, if you put, I'll put it in a different way. If they look at it, does that mean that we won't have the opportunity to say, never mind for the east of 179th to 522, we don't want to do that area for mixed use? Does that throw off the process? Or after they do their analysis, could we carve away certain areas? I guess is the easiest way to put the question.
So so their analysis will be, do you meet the county, regional, and state policy? So it wouldn't be, you wouldn't send them this, you would send them your draft comprehensive plan, which would include all of the policy background, the environmental impact statement that essentially assesses the impacts and provides mitigation. So they don't look at the scenarios per se. What they look at is, does your policy, for example, for housing, middle housing is a big one right now, does that meet the state requirements that the Department of Commerce have established? Does it meet, from a transportation improvement plan, does that meet the transportation requirements? So they look at the end document and have time to review that. They're not going to evaluate just our interim scenarios that will go into the initial environmental impact statement. They're looking at the end results for compliance.
Okay, so the sending it to them for consideration, that's like a year from now or more. That's not like as soon as we kind of have a loose agreement on what our plan
Correct.
is with the. Okay, got it.
Correct.
I was thinking
no, not right now.
Like this, okay, got it. All right.
There's regular coordination for all of these groups, but it's also, the decision really, like for your example about 179 to Roosevelt, those areas, that's really, the community's planning commission and city council's decision. That's part of that future. That's part of that future land use map discussion. What we need to do now is actually get those scenarios so that we can do the evaluation to come back to you to have that conversation about what those impacts and those trade-offs are. So that's why we're trying to move forward now, because, you know, this has to be done by December 2024. It sounds like a long time, but it is not. It's not when you start to think about the amount of work that you have to do to get there.
Right.
Jake, I also wanted to mention that specific projects, so there will be a traffic study with this process, but specific larger projects will also have a traffic impact analysis in the package, right? So let's say around those
Specific development.
specific, yeah. Let's say mixed use around Lowe's, you know, first floor commercial, 3 floors of residential, 200 occupants. They would have a specific traffic impact analysis presented before the project is signed off.
Right, later down the road, after the comp
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Liz, you had a question?
I appreciated some of the points that Jake brought up on traffic and how Alex brought those up. But Commissioner Bull, you brought up a good point. So if we have a bunch of smaller projects in an area that individually are going to have a lot of impact individually, there's not a study done on traffic impact. If you say have 4 projects, all unrelated, but they happen to be in a very small section of town or on a street, there's no traffic study done, correct?
So there's, I think there's a couple. Let me see if I'm parsing your question correctly. So from a comprehensive plan standpoint, we don't look at individual development projects. What we look at as the kind of the assumed type of growth within an area, which
when the city is looking at individual projects, there wouldn't be a traffic study done if there's 4 individual projects. Down the road, after the comprehensive plan is passed, there's no larger traffic impact study done if there's a bunch of smaller projects being built within, say, a 1 or 2 block area of a road that's on some of these major corridors we're talking about.
I
traffic study done, correct? Right.
Well, so I'll defer to Lance and Anita, but typically when you do development projects of that nature, you'd still have a traffic impact study, which would look at that specific development. And so from an iterative or a kind of cumulative standpoint, you know, each of those projects, like if you're the first project in, you're just evaluating you. If you're the 4th project in, you would have to look at what is already happening in those other areas and whether or not there's capacity to accommodate, you know, so they're still accounted for, but you're not doing like a comprehensive study on all 4 projects. You'd be looking at where you're in the mix, kind of what's there and what's on the ground. And then you would be looking at that mitigation. And that could be different if you're the first project versus the 4th project. Like first project in is usually great. Maybe you don't have to do anything. 4th project, you tip the balance and then you have to do mitigation. But that's kind of a hypothetical, you know, for how that would apply.
I did like that we hopefully sooner rather than later, and I apologize, Brandy, I'll be quick, that we'll be getting community feedback like on some of the scenarios we're looking at, because I think it's good to get community feedback on how each one of these possibilities could impact people and the thought process at this stage. So I appreciate knowing that part of the next stage process. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. We will be, that's a whole point of moving these forward, is so we can do some traffic analysis and look at some of the other impacts and then go out to the community and talk about those. And then ultimately we have options now. We'll get to one option, which could be a combination or one or the other or both, you know, both and, depending on what those discussions are in the coming months. And I think that's a probably early spring, you know, February, March discussion point for those options, because we need some time to do the traffic work and, you know, some of the other elements.
Brandy?
Yeah, I think this is along the same lines of the concern of Liz. So we also, in our next, little farther down in our packet today even, we have, like an equity statement, and then we had some, questions that we were going to look at adopting, so that every decision that we go to make, we're looking through these potential impacts to be sure that we're not causing displacement or, disparity of impacts on any certain group. So I think what we're all trying to think of here is, since we have that in our mind, and then we're looking at the front end of this, if we can try to curb any of those impacts from the beginning, we're gonna get a better scenario to give to the public, and then a quicker and better outcome. So, how do we, I think that's maybe what we're trying to figure out, is how do we think through all those impacts now, even though we don't have that checklist for us yet? And by the time I think we are making this decision, the final decision, I think we'll have it. Most likely, right, Lance and Anita, or because we're working through that process as well right now, trying to adopt these questions that we want to ask for impacts on decisions. So I think that's on our mind, but without the formal checklist, I think we're doing, it sounds like we're all thinking of it, so it'll probably, the impacts will be thought of. I have a second question though. Can we go back to like your land, the maybe center focused land use map, or the node one, either one, and maybe have some dialogue about what people like the best or what concerns people have on any of these? I wanted to just bring up two things. One thing I'd heard a lot of people saying, which I think you tried to capture on the second one, where you show the 154th and 179th, we were hearing people say that they want like something to do in their neighborhood, or like amenities, retail, small retails in their neighborhood. That feels like a lot, like for the whole 179th and 154th. Some more nodes, I would have thought maybe in those areas instead of the whole thing, but maybe that's what we'll get to with the impact or with the input from community. And Frylands, there's no housing added on Frylands Boulevard on some of those areas where there's already retail. So instead of it just being commercial on parts of Fryland, turning that into mixed use, that was something I'd heard come up. And since it's already one of those hotspot areas, right? When people say they want to keep the growth in the center, the hotspot area is already Frylands. People congregate there. And then my other suggestion is the downtown commercial. Instead of, right now we're trying to like, in these scenarios, we're elongating Main Street and then elongating 179th for business. Those people from 179th can't walk to the grocery store still. And so we're still not combating that traffic problem, or that problem where we've got all of our grocery stores on one side of the highway. What I was expecting to see more of is more housing in the downtown commercial area, where or mixed use, and possibly some multifamily, so that you're getting a bulk of the people housed in a walkable part of town.
So
those are my two suggestions.
Brandy, are you talking about the red area here?
Yes.
So we are, thank you for bringing that up, because that is something that probably isn't as clear on the maps. We are assuming that's actually of the highest density areas for residential. However, it could be apartment, but it's likely in the mixed use category. We just painted it as downtown because it's a kind of a specific hub within the city. But point well taken about, where are people able to walk to, whether it's groceries or other services. That's certainly something we could look at from a scale standpoint to see. Again, we're not looking at those specific uses, but do the general kind of future place types that we've identified, would they be able to accommodate something, like that? And maybe it's not a 100,000 square foot Safeway, but it could be, a locally serving grocer or something like that that is a smaller footprint.
So red says it's downtown commercial, but
Yeah.
red actually is downtown mixed use?
Well, so downtown commercial, it's kind of a specific type because it has Main Street, it has, kind of that historic quality to it. So we kept it as it's different than when you look at like along Tierney in that purple area, which is more kind of big box retail. That's a different type of use. But downtown commercial assumes that you could build, residential within that, in addition to the commercial kind of Main Street uses within that. So it's more mixed than I think what that kind of states just for the title. So we can do a better job of describing that.
If you go to this same map, but it's the one that has plan concepts, there's a little note with an arrow that says increased densities in downtown through higher density mixed and residential uses. So I knew I'd seen the note somewhere, so that one there.
Yep, thank you.
Because 24 units per acre is the highest density multifamily that we have.
Yep.
Yeah. Jake, you had a question?
Yeah, and Liz, I just want to say thank you. You summarized my point a lot better than I did, but I'll bring it up again on the 30th, but I guess I just wanted to remind us as a planning commission that there's a lot of responsibility or onus on us to think through kind of what the long-term trend could be, because just like you mentioned, if you think about all the Chain Lake developments, those are all different builders, and we may have plug and played a bunch of different mixed use ideas up there that when we initially thought of it, yeah, it can handle one or two developments, but each one takes on a case by case basis and they might not care. So anyways, thank you for saying that. But then Alex, the downtown commercial, the red here, when you look at that parcel and just coincidentally, it was an idea that I was just thinking of. You have that corner piece where the Rite Aid and actually the state roofing land is now. And I'm just thinking about like the feasibility of any kind of density actually being there along the train tracks. And may I just ask if you could look into if there's kind of precedent for that kind of density being right along a train track, or if it's just kind of being used because it's redevelopable land and it kind of helps with the numbers for fitting in housing. Like, I just don't know how, I don't know. I hope you understand my question.
No, I do. And, you know, that's one that I think we've been talking about a fair bit there, you know, partly some of these changes are not meant to increase housing per se, but it looks at some of those areas that are considered multifamily. And, you know, like that area right there is, and I think you're talking about this North Kelsey, this right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I'd have to look back, but I believe that's actually zoned multifamily, or its future land use map is multifamily.
Yes.
So what we were looking at is like, okay, you're absolutely right. You know, multifamily on a train track, on a, you know, a major highway, maybe that's challenged. But if you added mixed use, which may not be mixed use, it could be mixed use residential, it could be mixed use office, or it could be mixed use maker. It could be some other type of element that's not necessarily kind of that traditional mixed use element. I think the reason why we looked at North Kelsey is because it's a prominent crossing for US 2. And when you start to look at kind of visibility and other types of uses in that area that, you know, people are talking about as that walkable space between different areas, that could be a street where you could actually start to redevelop and start to see different kind of connections between, say, that more commercial area to the north and downtown to the south. But no doubt, certainly challenges adjacent to railroad. You know, when it's, you know, not at Monroe's scale, and I kind of probably shouldn't bring it up, but downtown Denver actually has huge developments right next to its rail lines, and we're talking 3-mile long coal trains going through at all hours of the day. So if the timing is right and it's the right environment, there are examples, but it's you know, it would take the right type of mix, I think, to make that work.
Right.
And again,
and
yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, please. And I bring that up because I like Brandy's idea of just pulling this back up just for consideration of these different parcels. And with that spot in particular, I guess it would just kind of take living around Monroe to know about it, but where Blueberry Lane intersects Kelsey, that intersection is a nightmare already. And just when it comes to the idea of redeveloping it, which could happen in the future, there's still existing single family homes on that corner. And obviously that could be bought and leveled and redeveloped. But I mean, I'm just saying the feasibility of somehow mixed use fitting in there ever, considering the traffic implications of it, considering the difficulty that it would take to get an actual builder in there to do it. And then to weigh that kind of idea with the fact that the impact of rezoning it that way when we do need industrial space as well, that is my kind of concern. And that's why I encourage us, everyone, council, planning commission, to think hard about those things, just because these rezones, obviously, as we heard today, have a huge impact. So, yeah, that's all I got.
No, and that's a good point. I do want to stress these aren't, you know, if any of these move forward, there could be some rezoning. These are just scenarios, but Lance or Anita, you know, I believe this is the area Kate had brought up a while back as kind of a residual series of parcels from the 2015 plan. I don't recollect exactly how it came up, but there was some other discussion on these parcels. Do you remember, or can you provide input on that?
Yeah, it was, if we're talking about the same ones on the northeast side, it was rezoned from, I don't know if it was commercial or industrial, I don't know what it was before, but then it was rezoned to multifamily, which is what it is now. But it's predominantly in a commercial, or you could call it a light industrial use at the moment.
I'm sorry, just for clarification, it is where, just ironically that this came up, it is where state roofing is now. That's the kind of area that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think they were saying that was planned to be zone density in the 90s and then went into effect in 2019. So,
yeah, there was a lag time between the comp plan update and then some rezones. And I don't know all of the details of the history of what that was, but there were a number of places around town that occurred in different sequences.
Gotcha.
So
Liz?
yeah, certainly a question mark on this one, I think.
Do you have a question, Liz?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all kind of heard a couple times that property is who we've been spoken about the last 2 meetings. Has lots of challenges. Something that Jake also did bring up, and I'm sure this will come up again when North Kelsey gets looked at a little closer. There's only so much eminent domain left to take away from or consider for homeowners to buy more land away from them, to widen Kelsey at that area. We've had this discussion back when Ben Swanson was in Bailey's position. So there's I mean, we've talked about trying to put in bike lanes to add connectivity. But this will all, I'm sure, come out more as more studies are done. But yeah, North Kelsey is very tight. While we have the sewer and other infrastructure systems there, it's great that our city's planned that. There's other unique challenges to North Kelsey that unfortunately we do need to be aware of and considerate of without displacing the existing businesses that are there that I do hear impact already currently. Yeah. I hear that feedback, not from businesses that have come to our meetings, but that the businesses along there are impacted now. So anyways.
No, that's great to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for taking all my questions.
Sure. Do my best. Hopefully I answered them all right for you.
Randy?
I have another question. So you said that these suggestions aren't going to necessarily turn into zoning changes or code updates. So would it be, if it's not going to turn into zoning changes, would it be something like we're changing and allowing conditional use for these type of things, like on 154th? Or can you tell me what the impact would be?
Sure. So let me clarify. So these scenarios are just essentially ways for us to test different options. So this is not your future land use map. The most likely case is that neither one of these will move forward as a future land use map. In the coming months, there'll be discussion about what that should look like. And it could be a combination of these. It could be other changes that we would evaluate through our final EIS that comes in, probably late summer. So these are just ways to test, various options to make sure, one, we're meeting targets, but also to see what's the traffic impacts, what would mitigation be required to be able to address those? What about environmental and critical areas? How do we address middle housing when we know we're going to have to address that probably through zoning and other types of policy changes. So in terms of zoning and future land use, these are not future land use maps. These are a series of what ifs that we look at for analysis. As we get into the spring and summer of the comp plan process next year, then we'll start to take all of these and combine them into a single draft future land use map that we'll continue to modify with the community and with you and with city council. That is essentially becomes the implementing piece of the land use component for the comp plan, along with all of the policy. So Brandy, it's not so these, like I said, these are just a series of what ifs. There could be zone changes depending on what your future land use map is, but these are not your future land use maps. These are just a way for us to test various things that community members have talked to us about, and what we've heard from others about how we meet those growth targets.
Appreciate the question.
No, it's a great question.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Will we see you on the 30th, Alex?
Yes, I'll be there in person on the 30th. So apologies for not being there today. So
Looking forward to it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
We're going to move on to item 6, old business. So this is the discussion we've been having. Most recently, we had some edits that planning commissioners wanted it to be brought back for final time before it's presented to city council, a clean version that we can read through and bless. Make sure we hit all the salient points that everyone wanted to have included. We got it separated as a definition and a statement, so it's clean. So
I know that Kate has been the one that's been leading through this conversation, and I think you summarized it well. And for the information that's in the packet tonight, hopefully is just a clean version of what folks have been talking about. I did want to make a couple of comments. I think that one of the, this is a new part of comp plan that for this update. So it's honestly, it's been a learning experience and opportunity for everyone. I do think that the internally we were trying to figure out how to move forward on this, this definition piece and, the conversation. We took this out to SAB and to EDAB, and they made a lot of similar comments as the planning commission, just sort of conceptually. I think, the planning commission, as your task is to go into more detail and do a lot more wordsmithing. I think that the breaking it out from to a definition as well as to having the equity statement is going to really serve us well, because the context of how do we have this general definition, and then how do we have a statement where, Brady, I think you were touching on it earlier, where we're going to incorporate, we're going to modify and have policies in the comp plan that are going to get at what that paragraph is trying to say. and will give us a better roadmap, if you will, for how we're evaluating policies and actions going forward. And, but there's, you know, the definition is something that we can use in a lot of different contexts. And then the equity statement being something that will be very specific to the comprehensive plan. So as that process was going on, it's like, God, how are we gonna do this? And I think this is a good path forward on it. And that some of the other groups were struggling with the breadth or the length of the statement and looking at it as a definition, and it was a little confusing, but I like where it's come out. And so hopefully and I just will get confirmation from the planning commission that this is just a cleaned up version of what you had talked about at the last meeting. Is everybody on board with that? So really what we're doing tonight is just to, if the planning commission is happy with this, then this is what would go forward as a recommendation to city council. And that would, so we would actually have a vote on that tonight. If the planning commission is prepared to move forward on that.
Comment question, with the definition, I'm in support of this format with the shorter definition and then the larger statement. There's just a tiny different with the definition. It's got equity is the fair distribution of opportunities. The equity statement is the equity is the fair and just distribution. So we want that to match. So it's and just up above.
Just was something that was included, I believe, in the one of the internal reviews that we had. I will say though that came up in discussion, I believe, with both EDAB and JSAB. It was like, you know, how do people define just in different ways?
Is there in your any difference between fair?
No, I'm just wondering why the difference between, because the definition is here and then the statement includes like the definition first and then expansion on it. So I was just curious why the differential between the two. I'm fine with it without, I'm fine with it with. I'm just curious. It's just a tiny little difference there.
I'm guessing it's because they were just really trying to shorten it, or they forgot it.
Yeah, I'm assuming it was probably a typo, so I guess we should at least make that little minor adjustment, whether we want to add the and just to the definition or take out the and just in the statement. It's very minor, but it's.
Words matter.
Yeah.
I'd say go without just. What do you think?
So you would delete
Just leave it
and
the way
just.
that it currently is
That's
for
right.
definition.
That's what I was trying to get at. Is
Yeah.
that redundancy?
The way it is.
Yeah, I'm fine with removing it. I don't think planning commission had that initially. I think it got added with other discussions.
Okay.
But we could leave it in the statement though, right?
I think
I
Melanie
don't know what the point is to putting and just in the statement and not in the definition.
Yeah.
I understand why somebody might have wanted to add the and just, but if it's going to be there, then we should probably, for consistency, keep it in the definition as well. But I'm fine with removing it. I would just say remove the and just from the equity statement, so it's consistent.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, me too.
Liz, comments? Janelle, comments? Yeah, thumbs up. You got a comment?
Yes, I'm sorry, I know we're running.
I think
Liz,
it's
go
time
ahead.
to remove the and just distribution part. Yeah, I agree with that.
Jake, let me get to Janelle real
Yeah.
quick. Janelle?
Yeah, I mean, it looks good. I agree with Melanie, just for consistency purposes. If it's going to be right underneath it, like how we say equity is the fair distribution, then it should say that too in the equity statement. And I do want to say too, that I really like that, you know, you have the definition that is kind of like simply stated, but the equity statement goes more in depth. And there's a need for that. And so I appreciate that. And I like the way that accompanies the definition.
Thanks, Janelle. Yeah, that sort of saved me, because our first discussion about this, we were trying to get a definition, and I said, it doesn't have any limit on the length, does it? And then we got to a statement rather than a definition. So the ability to everybody to agree that we can separate the definition from the statement and come up with this. And it kind of cohesively flows with Imagine Monroe. I think, so I'm glad that everybody had input into it and really rolled it around a few times, so appreciate that.
I just want to, for the record, clarify what it would mean for the city, and this was one of the things a few months ago, what it means for the city to say, we will fairly distribute power in a government document. And I don't know if any planning commissioners want to explain like what the mechanics of that actually is or what that means.
Well, it's, the way I see it is that everyone has the same amount of influence or power. They're distributing it equally, so any person who wants to come here and talk in front of us has the same power. Whether they are rich or poor or formerly incarcerated or, so that's what it's telling me.
To affect change.
Got it.
Janelle?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. I mean, if you simply just go to the dictionary and just look up the word power, it just says the ability to do something or act in a particular way. So it's not like meant like in a negative way. Like, I mean, if someone has an issue with the word power in that sentence, then like that might be an opportunity to actually look within like yourself and see like why that's so offensive. Like it's literally just the ability to do something or act in a particular way. So it's not like I got more power. Like it's simply that, the ability to do something or act in a particular way. So I think it's important, very important to state that, because there are people that feel like they have less power, and it shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't be like that. So you have to explicitly state it. And that's why power, influence, and resources to meet the need, that's why you have to explicitly state it, because everyone doesn't really understand it. So
Sorry.
Jake?
So like to a outside citizen reading this who didn't sit in on this discussion and like got the definition of power read, when it comes to defining that, I mean, if a person on the street goes, the city is giving power. So I don't know. I know we've been doing it since June, and this is like draft 5 or. So I'll vote for it. I just want to add, I don't know, a note or a comment that the word is just odd in a government document. And I'll end with that, since, I mean, it sounds like we got a majority anyway, and it is a good compromise, so.
well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't lower my hand, but I would have just rose it again because I want to say something. So Jake, like really, like, so when you see that word power, like, why do you think that after I stated like the definition, like if you Google it and look it up, like why do you think it should not be in a city government? Like, why do you think it shouldn't be a state, like mentioned in a city government document?
I guess it's just the mechanics of whatever it means for a government to fairly and justly distribute power. Because as we were just talking about the word just, these subjective terms, and then you use a word of force like power, I guess it's just an theoretical thing on the role of government and government text.
Mhm.
So that's my personal opinion. I mean,
Okay,
yep.
well, okay, yeah, that's
Took
why
out-
I just, wanted to
It
see.
doesn't
how-
say the city will ensure that there is a fair distribution. We're just defining equity, so that when we want to revert back to when we're making decisions on stuff, we say, you know, was equity considered in this decision? And then we would look back and say, was there a fair distribution of opportunities for people to be notified, or power for people to be able to come and give us comment? I think we did see some other definitions that said the city will, and we took that out.
Good point. I see that. And then just to, I guess, add to, gosh, I feel bad for extending the discussion, but to add as an explanation for why I feel that way, when you add subjective terms like fair and just, and let's say that we get, I don't know, Jay Bowl is the mayor of the town, and he says, sorry, Jay, he says, my definition of the just distribution of power means I only give power to the Bowl family. That is my theoretical issue with a subjective use, or the use of a subjective word to define power. So if we are using so here is the question. Though this is the equity statement, we are probably going to, when we're using the word equity for whatever test in the future, whether it be the criteria that I assume we'll come back to for comp plan amendments, when we go back to the definition of equity and we say, okay, where did we get that self-made definition of equity? We got it from our equity statement. And the equity statement said, it's the fair and just distribution of power. That is the question. That is not objective. And so that is my, I guess, theoretical concern. And I don't think I would be alone in that idea. And so I loved hearing other planning commissioners' feedback, because this is a representative body. And so, yeah.
I like it. Are we
I like it
able
as
to
well.
say if we wanna vote for it yet? Make a motion?
I'd like to move that we approve the definition and equity statement as submitted, with the amendment to remove the words "and just" from the beginning of the equity statement.
I second the motion.
Janelle can have it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Janelle seconded the motion. Questions, we're gonna vote on it. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
You're gonna abstain?
I am.
You can oppose, right? It's
Yeah,
still
you
a
can
pass,
absolutely
because I don't
oppose.
think you can abstain, it's one or the other.
I think you can abstain.
Only if you.
Because I'm not against it. I like all the work we put into it. It's just that question about the power thing in the future. In that J Bowl scenario, I understand it's crazy, but I use it as an example. In the future, I will have to answer to the fact that I voted yes for a government definition that said the just distribution of power determined by the government, determined by Melanie, or the people that are in leadership making the decisions at that time. That's tough to vote on record for that for me. And so that's why I'm going to abstain. Because I appreciate this, what we all did together, and I would vote yes for it because it's a good compromise, but it's just I don't know, an ethical stance.
Honestly, we were designing this to be future-proof, and it's not defined by any elected official or any government employee. This is.
It's referenced in city it's going to be referenced in city documents.
I'd like to ask that we find out whether abstaining is appropriate, because the city council just very recently at a meeting brought this up as potentially problematic in another thing, and abstaining from voting may have required that you have been removed from the entire discussion.
I don't think that's what it's
So
for.
I think it's just a really big conversation
Just
from
about
city council
recusals.
about this.
I'll have to look at the RCW and see if it expands more on it. But in our, rules of procedure for the Monroe Planning Commission, any commissioner who abstains from voting without a conflict of interest for RCW 42.23 or appearance of fairness issue per RCW 42.36 must state his or her reason for abstaining. Abstentions have no effect on the calculation of votes.
All right.
Yeah, and there was a very long discussion. In fact, I think it was at more than one meeting about abstaining as a city council member. And I don't believe unless it is, and I will double check with our clerk, but I don't believe, I think Hannah is right, that unless we change the bylaws or make some decision at the council level, or city council makes a decision and also applies it to planning commission, which I believe they can, then the bylaws as they exist today would rule.
Okay.
And
And clarification, sorry.
Go ahead.
That's all I wanted was clarification. And so if it's good, then we're an advisory board. We're not the elected officials that make the absolute final decision. So.
I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Go continue.
I was going to say, the reason that I decided to abstain too is because I thought it was an option. And again, I don't want to vote no on adopting a definition of equity in the equity statement. I abstain because I am not going to change 6 people's minds. And so that being the case, I don't want to keep holding up this process. So I am abstaining because I have an issue with one part of the definition, but me continuing to say, this is my stance, bring it to the next meeting, that's not productive. And I appreciate all of your guys' opinions completely, and I appreciate what we're doing. And yeah, thank you for all the work that each of you put into the compromise, and staff as well.
So go carry. And I will double check about the abstention for how that discussion from city council affects plan. I don't believe that it does. It was kind of an interesting discussion.
It was very interesting.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we were doing it
No,
proper.
that's-
So if it's proper, then
Proper to bring that up. So
I have no objections.
I'll talk to Jody about it tomorrow and confirm.
Okay.
Thank you for all your work on that. I know that was.
It's done, guys. Sorry.
Why I didn't want to vote no and keep it.
And so got our votes, we're gonna forward a recommendation to city council. Yes? Okay, move on to,
I'm sorry, I got one more question for Lance. Does the framework come back? Is that coming back at a future meeting?
What we just voted on?
No, I think you may have been out of town for that meeting, but there is a framework that we have to make for future comp plan amendments as well. Yeah, I think it's 8 questions, 2 sets of 4.
That will come back.
Okay. And just in case I forget it by then, when we discuss that in the future, the other day when I left the meeting, I was just thinking about the Smith Brothers situation. And if we were to say, oh man, that's a terrible situation, that was a zoning mistake, it should be changed, and you take that as a potential comp plan amendment. If we had ran it through those criteria, and let's say question 8 is, does it advance equity? And in their case, if it was zone mixed use or density, you'd probably say no, it doesn't advance equity. And so it didn't fit the criteria for it to be done as a comp plan amendment. And so anyways, sorry, I just wanted to put that out in the open because please remind me of that in the future meeting. I assume it'll be a month or 2 from now because of the 30th meeting. But anyways, yeah, thank you, sorry.
Those were supposed to be together. They were together on the night when we looked at it.
Yeah, and they're not in this agenda bill,
I missed
so,
it, that it wasn't in this
Yeah.
one.
and so it was a very last minute thing that Kate isn't here, so don't know, I can't speak if that was on purpose. If we need to bring it back, we will. I apologize, I can't give you a definitive answer.
No, that's, I'm sorry. I
No,
don't even want an answer. I'm just trying to say you guys
I'm glad
led
you
me
brought
to
it
that
up.
because that question was something I really wanted to talk to the commissioners about.
New business item, Anita?
Yes.
We have, item 7.1 Shoreline Master Program periodic.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here tonight to talk about required amendments to the Shoreline Master Program, the City Shoreline Master Program, or the SMP. So I think the only planning commissioner that was here when we did our update back in 2019 was Commissioner Wolf. So I'm going to give a history and background on the project, and we'll go through what amendments are needed and required by the Department of Ecology. So the city of Monroe is mandated to conduct a periodic review of its shoreline master program as required by the Washington State Shoreline Management Act, or SMA. The SMA requires all SMPs to be reviewed, revised if needed on an 8-year schedule established by the legislature. So at the time when we started this update back in 2018, it was on an 8-year schedule. So now it is on a 10-year schedule. So that's the change for that. So back in 2018, we contracted with a consultant, ESA, and then we also worked with Department of Ecology. We had a planner dedicated to our jurisdiction to help us go through those changes. So those changes included an update to the document itself, the SMP, and it also required some updates to the shoreline code. So we did that all together, and our deadline for that was June 30th of 2019. We accomplished that, took it through Planning Commission, had a recommendation to council, and then it was adopted the formal ordinance was adopted on August 13th of 2019, which was fine. It just needed to go through council before the June 30th deadline. And because we did that, we were in compliance at the time with the state. So we submitted the amendments to DOE on September 4th of 2019. We actually didn't receive a response until October 20th of 2020. So I'm guessing it was mostly because of a combination of things. There was some turnover at DOE, and then also COVID, and then also we had some turnover in our department. So at that time, we did receive an email, and it was sent to the mayor, and it was CC'd to Ben, who was the community development director at the time, and me. So the email said we received conditional approval, and I did include that with the agenda bill. So I guess, and like I said before, it was a combination of things. On me personally, I thought it was approved, but as you can see in that email, there was an attachment, attachment B, that talked about some changes that the city need to do to the SMP before it could be signed off by DOE. So the reason why this all came up was because the city recently submitted a shoreline permit to the state for the pickleball courts at Skycombe Metro Park. So the new planner over there, I guess she's not as new now. She came in around COVID 2020, but she noticed that there were some that we were still on the list of not being signed off for the SMP. So she contacted me, and then we went through the changes, and then we can go through those changes in a little bit. So in talking with her, the changes are minor in nature. It does require a comp plan amendment, so that's why I'm bringing this forward to the Planning Commission today. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to do an introduction to you and a discussion, not requiring any action at this point. And And then we can kind of decide if we need to hold another meeting to talk about the changes, or if we can move forward on scheduling a public hearing. So, let's see, we can go down, see through the packets. So let's kind of take a look at attachment B, and those are the required changes from DOE. So they also provided this really nice, before we get to attachment B, they provided this really nice attachment A, findings and conclusions. So it kind of goes through the process, kind of what I already talked about. We did community engagements, we did a lot of things, and we met all the requirements up until this final submission to DOE. So if we go down to attachment B, just kind of want to go over the changes real quick. So the first one is, and like I said, the changes are to the document itself, to the SMP. There's no code amendments required at this point. Oh, and then let me back up one. There is a map change needed as well. Sorry about that. So I did include a map in this agenda bill. So there was a slight on the mapping, it shows the Cadman site, and in the current map, it shows the Cadman site as the urban conservancy zoning shoreline designation. So that is incorrect, because if you reference the SMP, it clearly states it's supposed to be high intensity. So that's the other change that needs to be done with this shoreline update. So we will do that as well. But, and I also included the current shoreline master plan. So I don't know if that's why the agenda packet is pretty large, because I included that. I'm not sure if any of the planning commissioners had a chance to review that, but that's just FYI for when we're reviewing. We do go through this document, make sure that the project is meeting these requirements as well as this shoreline code. So if we go back to attachment B, the first item is under chapter 1, introduction. So basically we need to revise the current definition in the document of shoreline jurisdiction. And so ecology just goes through this, gives us underlying changes needed, some strikeouts and what we need to delete, or strike throughs and what we need to delete. And then on the column to the right, ecology does a discussion and rationale. So, I'm looking through this, and I'm not, DOE does give the option to the city if we don't agree with these changes, but I mean, it's for clarification, and this is just, I believe, minor in nature. So, but we can have that discussion as well if you have any questions. So that's chapter 1. Also in chapter 1, introduction, there's the reference to the current code is not correct. So as you can see, it says adopted by ordinance number 005, should be 015. So that was just a minor mistake. And also it references the wrong chapter number. So those are just a couple of changes that we need to make in the document. So, and if you go to number 3, same type of thing, we just need to make sure that it's consistent in the document that references the correct ordinance number, and then also the correct code section. So I will do that. And then chapter 3, under general provisions, there's, it's section D, critical areas, subsection 2 of the regulations. So we just need to make sure that we update this definition for streams. So to make it, the state requires a minimum, some type of, so we need to make sure that it matches the typing, the correct typing of the different streams that we have in the city and in our current code. So it's, yes, because we did amend it in 2019. So we just need to make sure the water typing system is the same in the document. Then the last change needed is in chapter 8 of the definitions. We need to put a definition of fish habitats in the document. So this is the definition that came from DOE, and I don't see any problem with adding that as well. So as stated before, this is called plan amendment process, noticing, scheduling a hearing, SEPA, and then we'll take it to planning commission and then recommendation to city council. I did a tentative schedule, an agenda bill, hoping to get this through planning commission by the end of the year and then taking it to council next year. Looked at the council schedule, looks like a lot of the council, the remaining council meetings are either canceled or doubled up or something. So that's the reason why it's gonna take a little bit longer to get it through council. But yes, so that is what I had to discuss tonight, and I will take any questions, to just get a planning commission option to, either continue with this meeting or, yeah, any other concerns.
If the pickleball courts, permitting is what kind of flagged that we weren't fully approved, does that impact the pickleball courts coming?
No, yes, so that one was approved, so she, the planner at DOE, was clear that it does not affect that permit at all. She was concerned that for future permitting, that we want to get this fixed, because it could affect any other permitting. And there's no deadline for this, but of course, we want to do it as soon as possible.
I had to ask because my children are wanting a lesson in what pickleball is, because we're there many times a week for sports practices right now, so
Okay,
I
nice.
just had to know.
Yeah, and just to give you an update, the court was poured by the city, but we need a contract with somebody to actually service the courts. And apparently we need, I think, like 5 days of no rain. So, yeah, so there's like, I can't guarantee that'll happen before the end of the year, but that's just where we're at. But at least it's poured and we're moving forward with that.
Any comments, questions? If no questions from planning commissioners, public hearing on the 27th of November, and then it goes to council.
Yes. That's the direction I get tonight.
The only comment is, yeah, thanks for laying it all out like that and, explaining it again to us, summarizing it, and I think that sounds like a good plan.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
See any comments? Online, so we're good. Next up, 7.2, this is Hannah and our end of month.
Yeah, and I realized once I sent your agenda packets out, well, once I printed them out today, that I didn't actually attach the monthly report to your agenda packets. So Lance, it was only my second time doing it, okay? I'm really sorry. I made sure that it was attached for council though.
Because I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I gotta check that one.
I'll double check it. So we have the September Community Development Monthly Report. We'll start at the top as always. We had 2 pre-application meetings for the month of September. One was for Miracles and Memories Academy. They wanted to use an existing structure to provide respite care to disabled individuals of all ages at 1022 West Main Street. The other was a proposal to rent the ground floor of a building out as flex space for work, office space, or like an event space. And that's the building that's over by Safeway, underneath DSHS. For building permits, we issued 0 single-family resident permits in September. That's down from 4 in August. And 2 commercial TIs were issued. Building inspections, we had 199 inspections in September. That's 18 more than August. For our project highlight, it's the community development project development map that we showed to you at our last meeting, where you can Randy, I don't think you were here for that meeting. So it's an interactive map that is in our GIS system. It's available on our website. You can click on different parcels and it'll show you project information, the status of the application, planner information, and yeah, and it'll have links to the project's webpage as well. Scrolling down to current projects, there were actually no changes to this page between August and September. So no updates there. Building permits, like I said, 0 single-family resident permits were issued in September. Code enforcement cases. Look at the numbers on that. I think code enforcement, we had less opened, but more closed between August and September. For business licenses, we had 80 new business license applications and 126 business license renewals. That's 22 more new business licenses than August. Here's a list of our new business applications. Anyone have questions about any of those?
I just need my glasses. I just say the ripped.
The beauty crypt, yeah.
You were seeing
There you go.
Oh,
There you go, Jay. A bit for you.
Are these brand new?
No, I didn't.
I got tired of squinting at the board in here.
You will see that the BECU got their business license for their new location that's going in over there by Providence. Yep. And then there were no changes to the comprehensive plan section or the annexations. Did you have any updates to middle housing?
No.
Nope. Pretty straightforward report. Sorry, I didn't give it to you.
We'll find
And
out.
the development map link on the community development page is active now, so if you haven't checked that out, and you can go in and click on the different projects. I was just looking at them here, and some of them have additional documents that are attached to them, and others won't. So just, if you're looking at those, make sure that you're looking for additional information,
Yeah.
or there'll be like web documents to it.
So this is our projects page where we keep things updated for current land use applications that are in and things that are currently in construction. And we've got a big giant link to the development map on there as well. So, yep. All right. Anyone have any questions? No?
Awesome. To our next item, discussion by commissioners and staff, and I'll start with Liz.
I don't think I really have anything tonight, other than I appreciate all the city staff for all the presentations tonight, and of course Alex, who's not there anymore, but his presentation was great, and I do really appreciate all the hard work the city put in to get all the data for the surveys and everything. So lots of great information. So thank you.
Janelle?
I do not have anything for tonight. Yeah, thanks for the discussion, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Jacob?
I've got nothing to add tonight.
I wanna say, it seems like lately there's like a lot of input being gathered, like the school districts asking for a walking survey, the city was asking for a trails and walking survey, and I feel like I'm opening surveys quite a bit in my email, which I think is great. And it is part of the whole outreach that we're trying to do, and it seems like everybody's on board with trying to get community input, and so exciting times. And I hope that it all can find a way to come together so that we're using the same information and going all in the same direction, so. Thanks.
The better on social media too.
I don't get on that.
Yeah, but they are.
Oh,
You're not missing
I'm
much.
just letting you know, so thank you for participating in the surveys.
Yeah.
Done a comprehensive plan on those things, so. Just wanted to mention a couple things. So when we're talking about a couple different times, we're talking about multifamily or apartments near the tracks, the railroad tracks. I wanted to remind everybody that across from the hospital, Housing Hope has apartments that are on the, very near the railroad tracks. So that is something we do have in town. Other thing I wanted to mention or ask staff, our community development director in particular. So industrial, I like our industrial area, jobs and all that. So if they're a legal non-conforming, can they expand or change their business area configuration within the walls of that particular building? What's possible?
That, if you want to go down a rabbit hole in terms of understanding like certain planning topics, non-conforming and variances can put you to sleep or keep you awake depending on
Well,
your perspective. Or
I'll come back to that question at a later time then, when we're deeper into the comprehensive.
but so it is, I'm really biting my tongue not to say it depends, because that's what attorneys say all the time. But so it's all based on not increasing the non-conformity. And how do you define that? So if it's in a specific building, then it's easy. You have a use, it's in a specific building, are you increasing the footprint? When you have it and I would use state roofing as the example, because that's been under discussion, it's a site that has multiple buildings. And as we look through the history of it, there's been multiple uses in that site for years, to the point where, and we're learning about it as we get that information, because sometimes when you're having a discussion with a property owner, they don't know the question to ask. And so sometimes it really takes going through the discussion to be like, oh, that's, well, you never mentioned that before. Well, I didn't know that was important. One of the things that's been going on that property is that they've been leasing space out over the years to different entities. And so when you look at the mix of uses that have occurred out there, and then you have to say, okay, well, have these uses gone dormant for a certain period of time, because then you lose non-conformity in that way. So it's a particularly difficult site because of it's not just like the whole thing was just used as one building and it was a roofing company with all of these things. I mean, they leased space out, as I understand, for people to do like vehicle maintenance, but vehicles that not just not car maintenance, because they were doing something. So they've had welding. There's been a whole lot of things that have gone on out there for a long period of time. So it's we've really tried to provide as much clarity as we can to the property owner, but it's been tough, and we've had to, like they wanted to lease space out to folks, and we've had to say you can't do it. So it's maybe through this process. I mean, if you look at scenario 3, the proposal is to go back to commercial zoning on that. Maybe that'll take care of it.
Yeah, okay, but I'm sorry for the rabbit hole, but my question was specifically about the industrial park rather than something currently before us, because sometimes when a property gets rezoned, the value goes up and the property owner doesn't understand that the value is up.
Right.
They just don't want to rezone because they want to use it as it's historically always been used. So that's something totally different. This was specific to a tilt-up concrete building in an industrial park. Can they reconfigure it? And you said yes, if it stays within the walls.
That's interesting. Wow. So they could be manufacturing inside and then they could turn into.
Well, it's not manufacturing, it's illegal non-conforming, so they're not actually using it how the industrial park was intended.
Right, right. And I'm saying then they could turn it into a deli or a car dealership inside or something. And you're saying because it's within the walls, is that?
Well, no, so the use, this is how it gets complicated. So if you've got a use, let's just say the building is 20,000 square feet and you've got a use that's in there that's non-conforming, it's legally non-conforming. So they can continue doing that use forever if they wanted to, but they couldn't expand it, so they couldn't take that building and expand the footprint of it.
Right.
Or if you have a building that's had 4 uses in it, and so let's just say they're equally broken into 4, you couldn't expand that use within that building either. So
Okay.
it can get complicated.
Leave it to the
and-
lawyers.
Yeah, and because the intention for the most part with non-conforming uses is that they go away over time. And so but there's so many of them out there that you can't, allowing for some expansion. And if you look, and I think that the city has done a good job in taking into consideration uses in the tourist commercial zone. Because if you look in the non-conforming section of our code, there's very specific language that deals with uses in the tourist commercial zone that allows for expansions, and it states specifically how much those expansions can be. And we've had, just in the short time I've been here, well, 2 years, if that's short, we've had a number of applications and it's like, yeah, you can expand it, but you can only do it by this amount. So it doesn't always work out that clear. For the tourist commercial zone, we know very, very well what it is, and some of the other zones not.
I can give an example for the light industrial. So, oh, sorry.
What are you saying?
Yeah.
Step feeding, hopefully only a little bit past.
Yeah,
my-
I just have one more. So
I'll second.
all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Well, I was just gonna say real quick, sorry, I was just gonna say, so like, for example, the gymnastics in one of the buildings in the light industrial. If the gymnastics left, then you could have another gymnastics business in there. You can't have, if they left, you can't have another non-conforming business come in, it has to be the same type of business.
But can the gymnastics, can they expand?
They are right now.
No, they cannot expand.
Oh, no.
You can't expand, per the code. The only place where you can expand is in tourist commercial.
So yes, speaking hypothetically.
Right.
Thank you for,
And then I have a quick comment too.
I'm gonna
you're-
get you,
you're good.
I just
Okay,
wanted
good.
to wish best of luck to everyone that's on the ballot for planning commission, because we're not gonna have our own meeting prior to. So good luck to all of you. And if you know someone that loves planning and wants to be on the commission for the open spots, please recommend they apply when the mayor sends out his request for applications. Folks that listen to these meetings and love planning, they should apply as well.
Talk about non-conforming uses.
Yeah, it is kind of fun. Thank you. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
I don't have a whole lot, echoing what Brandy said. I love that there's a lot of, community outreach happening right now, just around, and yes, hopefully everybody's collaborating to share information, because that's helpful. And then a second is a mom with 2 young kids in sports right now, and I don't know for sure, I can't recall if it's on the like to-do list, for the parks, but lighting at Sky River Park in those fields would be amazing, because there's a lot of really little kids playing and practicing this time of year, with it getting darker earlier, and they start their practices at 5:30 and only go an hour, and it's pitch black out there. So lighting would be lovely if it's not already in the works. So it's just a random feedback comment that I have, and otherwise, thank you staff for all the presentations and stuff. It's been very informative tonight, and I appreciate all the information.
Want to interject, Jacob?
Not interject, I'm sorry. Got a comment to piggyback on something you said, or not to piggyback, but
Go ahead.
one more comment.
Go ahead.
So you talked about if you know anyone that likes planning, I want, talking to residents out and about, I've been bringing up the fact that we need more people to participate on committees, and sadly, there is a sense of apathy amongst people about participating, but there's also a sense of intimidation that a lot of people have, especially in today's climate. And I was thinking about why was, for instance, today or past discussions on this topic so intense? Because when I tell someone to go back and watch a planning commission meeting, if you want to know what it's about, and when I bring up something and there's sort of like rhetorical, I guess, personal challenges or challenges to my person or some of the things I've said, like for instance, I think it was a few months ago, I brought up an idea, and I think there was a mention of like, check your privilege. And then today it was, I think that person should look inside themselves, right? And so when I'm encouraging someone to consider serving on some of these commissions, and they're already intimidated by government, and they see sort of that language being used when we are an advisory commission, and we're not here to change each other's minds, and it's okay to not have unanimous votes. And so I would just say, consider that, I guess just consider that tone going forward, that at the end of the day, like, we all just have ideas. And if you mention that you like blue, I don't need to go, well, blue's not a good color. Anyone that likes blue needs to see other colors. Like that, I would just say, if we want to recruit more people to these positions, I think that we should show them the best. And that includes, I guess, kind of the respect that we do exchange 98, 99% of the time. Yeah, sorry for that piece. It's just, it is feedback that I literally hear from probably 4 out of 5 people that I talk to is, I'm too scared to get involved. So that's all I got.
Thank you.
Hopefully staff ends it on a lighter note. Sorry, guys.
Director Bailey.
Well, we had 3 staff members pretty recently attend the state APA conference in Spokane. It was myself and Anita and Kate, and it was a good opportunity to get just kind of a broad view of, we'll spend 2.5 days talking about nothing but planning, which could bore some people to death, but a lot of conversation about housing and about comp plan and some about how cities and counties are trying to address equity issues. And I thought it was, I hadn't been to a conference in a long time, but it was kind of energizing.
I'm glad you guys were able to go. They do have a pretty big organization that works on affordable housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So. Awesome. Anita?
Yeah, I was gonna say the planning conference was great, had a lot of good sessions on downtowns. So I was happy to share that when we start talking about that. Then also I went to a housing conference in Tacoma the week before. So that one was really good. So I'll have some ideas to bring when I bring back middle housing. And IHOP's coming. So I'm excited for some breakfast. So
Do we know?
I don't know when,
We don't know.
no, we don't know when, but I saw the blue roof go up and I was excited, so.
Their TI is still in review right now, but
Oh,
their
okay.
sign permit did get approved.
Okay.
So,
Did they apply for a cut-in off of two?
Um,
So.
There's another phase of that project coming.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. That would be super solid if they were allowed a driveway or two up to.
Then someone could get out without going down Blueberry.
Possible.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that would really help the business. So if they do apply for it, I wouldn't mind if you guys had the good stamp.
WashDOT has something to say about it, of course.
Or it's,
That's one of the obstacles is with, when you have a state highway, that's a, primary, access point for a lot of
And I
businesses.
know it's really close to the light and all that.
Yeah.
That's,
It's a tough intersection, but
I love that they maintain their landscaping out front. For years, that was, even when there was a business there.
okay, don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but we gotta have Hannah get us organized, tell us where we need to be and what we need to do.
Nothing besides the ginormous joint meeting on the 30th. So 1 week from today. And there's also going to be that recognition ceremony celebrating all of you guys and all of your hard work for the city. That's going to be, I think that was at 6:30, so half an hour before the meeting. Refreshments will be served and it would be lovely if you guys could make it. That's going to be at the Monroe Coordination Center. So it's on the old City Hall campus.
Where we were previously, yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, public works, police area, yeah.
And I don't have anything else besides everyone have a happy and safe Halloween. I'm gonna be a hobbit this year. I'm very excited.
Bring pictures to the next one.
the city has a competition between all of the departments.
You cannot
for-
say what our
Oh, you
costume
can't say
is.
what it is.
No, it wasn't. going to.
Wait till we're on the air.
But community development won last year. So we're defending our crown.
Yeah.
Would you mind?
I'm the adjournment.
I second.
All in favor, please say aye.
I
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. We're good. Thanks, everyone.